Lucas Kingsley adjusted his tie as he surveyed the elegantly decorated ballroom. The annual Kingsley Foundation Gala, his pride and joy, was in full swing. The room sparkled with opulent chandeliers, polished crystal, and well-dressed socialites mingling among prominent figures in business and philanthropy. This night was a testament to Lucas's status, both as a successful businessman and a generous benefactor. Yet, tonight, his mind drifted. It had been 4 years since Eleanor's passing, but certain anniversaries made the loss resurface, no matter how he tried to focus on his work. Lost in thought, Lucas didn't notice the woman approaching him until she was right in front of him. She had deep-set blue eyes, and something in her gaze made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite place why. She looked at him with an intensity that bordered on familiarity. "Mr. Kingsley," she greeted him softly, her voice firm yet carrying a strange undertone of warmth. "It's been a long time." Lucas frowned, tilting his head slightly. "I'm sorry, have we met?" She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that unnerved him. "Not in person, but I know you, Lucas. I know things that only someone close to you could know." A chill ran through Lucas. In his world, people often tried to get close to him, to secure favors or attempt underhanded schemes. He was familiar with the games people played around him, but this was different. Something about her seemed sincere yet unsettling. He kept his expression neutral, trying to mask his discomfort. "Miss Sarah," she replied, glancing down as if hesitant to reveal more. "Sarah Blake. And you know me because—" Lucas probed, keeping his voice polite but guarded. Sarah took a deep breath, as though bracing herself for something. "I know things about your life, Mr. Kingsley. Intimate things. Things only Eleanor would have known." The mere mention of Eleanor's name made Lucas's blood run cold. He stiffened, his face frozen, eyes narrowing. "Eleanor?" His voice was barely above a whisper. He forced himself to maintain composure, to not let his grief and confusion show. Sarah continued, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of sympathy. "Yes, she loved roses, didn't she? Especially the ones that grew wild in the countryside, near your vacation home." Lucas's hand tightened around his champagne glass. This was too specific. He hadn't shared that detail with anyone, certainly not with someone he'd never met before. "Miss Blake," he said, his tone sharpening, "I don't know who you are or what you think you know, but my wife's life and her memories are private. I would appreciate it if you respected that." Sarah looked momentarily wounded, but she didn't back down. "Mr. Kingsley, I understand your suspicion, but I swear, I mean no harm. It's just, there are things I know that I shouldn't. Things that don't make sense. I came here because I had to meet you, to see if what I feel is real." Lucas took a slow breath, his heart pounding uncomfortably. His life had long been sheltered by wealth and the predictable rhythms of high society, yet here he was, caught off guard by a woman he'd never seen before, but who somehow knew things no stranger should. He forced a dismissive laugh, but his unease showed in his rigid posture. "And what is it that you feel, Miss Blake?" She looked down, fingers twisting nervously, before meeting his gaze with a surprising boldness. "I feel like I know you, Lucas. As if Eleanor and I," she faltered, struggling to find the words. "It's like there's something left behind, something I've been carrying without understanding." An uneasy silence hung between them. Sarah looked into his eyes, and for a split second, Lucas saw something in her expression, a flicker of warmth and familiarity that made his stomach clench. It was the same look Eleanor had given him countless times over the years. But how could that be? He clenched his jaw, deciding he'd had enough of this bizarre encounter. "Miss Blake, whatever this is, it's highly inappropriate. My wife's memory is not a game. I don't know how you found out these things, but I would advise you to leave them in the past, where they belong." For a moment, a deep sadness crossed her face, but she nodded, taking a step back. "I understand. I only wanted to tell you." She hesitated, her voice softening. "Eleanor, she would have wanted you to be happy, Lucas." With that, Sarah turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Lucas frozen in place, his heart thudding heavily in his chest. He looked around, half expecting to see her watching him, but she was gone. As the gala continued around him, Lucas found himself unable to shake the feeling that something much larger was happening, something beyond his understanding. The more he thought about her words, the more haunted he felt. Eleanor would have wanted him to be happy. The gala was over, but Lucas was far from finding any rest. In the quiet of his mansion, he retreated to his personal library, a space Eleanor had cherished as much as he did. The scent of aged leather and polished wood filled the air, comforting in its familiarity. Yet tonight, even this refuge felt disturbed. The mystery of Sarah Blake gnawed at him, the words she'd spoken at the gala echoing in his mind. He knew people could be deceptive, especially with a fortune at stake. But Sarah's knowledge of Eleanor's personal details, the roses, the vacation house, her exact phrasing, defied any easy explanation. She'd even managed to imitate Eleanor's quiet way of gazing, a habit so deeply ingrained in his memory that he could still feel its warmth. Lucas hesitated before reaching for an old, worn album on the shelf. Inside were the remnants of his life with Eleanor. Photos from their early years, mementos from travels, and handwritten letters she'd left him over the years. These were private memories, sealed away since her death, yet something drove him to open them tonight. Perhaps he needed reassurance that no one could truly intrude on what they'd shared. As he flipped through the pages, a small envelope slipped out, falling to the floor. He picked it up, recognizing Eleanor's handwriting on the front. For Lucas. To be read when you're ready. His breath hitched. He'd found this letter shortly after Eleanor's passing, tucked into a drawer in her dressing room. But grief had paralyzed him back then. He hadn't been ready. Tonight, however, with the unsettling encounter still fresh in his mind, he opened the letter. The familiar curves of Eleanor's handwriting brought a rush of memories as he began to read. My dearest Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. It's strange, imagining a world where I can't hold your hand. But life has its mysteries, doesn't it? Things we never see coming. If there ever comes a day when you feel lost, or as if you're not alone even when you are, know that love has a way of binding us beyond this life. I can't explain it, I just feel it. I hope that when the time comes, you'll find peace and joy again. All my love, Eleanor. Lucas sat back, his mind racing. Eleanor's words seemed almost prophetic. How could she have known he'd feel this very confusion, this haunting sense of a connection lingering beyond the veil of death? Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, Lucas leaned back in his chair. His mind kept drifting back to Sarah. Her voice, her eyes, her mannerisms. It all seemed too close, like she had somehow absorbed Eleanor's essence. There was a knock on the door. It was his longtime friend and private investigator, Tom McCarthy. Tom had been with Lucas through countless investigations, both personal and business-related, but tonight, he looked curious. You don't usually call me so urgently after a gala, Lucas. Everything all right? Tom asked, taking a seat. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not sure. There's something strange going on. I need you to look into a woman I met tonight, Sarah Blake. She knows things she shouldn't. Tom raised an eyebrow. Like what? Details about Eleanor, intimate ones. Things only Eleanor or someone incredibly close to her could know. But this woman is a complete stranger to me. Tom was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of Lucas's words sink in. And you think she's, what, connected to Eleanor somehow? I don't know what to think, Lucas admitted. But she seemed sincere, not like someone trying to pull a fast one. She even had Eleanor's ring, or one exactly like it, down to the inscription I had engraved on the inside. Tom, it's impossible. The investigator's eyes widened slightly. That's unsettling. All right, I'll dig around. Any idea where she's from? She said her name was Sarah Blake and mentioned she's from up north, near the old town Eleanor grew up in. Start there. If this woman's some kind of scam artist, I want to know how she got her hands on these details. He paused, almost as if reluctant to say the next words. And if it's something else, I need to know that too. Tom nodded, the lines of his face creasing in concentration. I'll handle it discreetly. I'll let you know if I find anything worth mentioning. After Tom left, Lucas found himself staring at Eleanor's letter once more. His thoughts turned to Sarah's face, Her expressions, the inexplicable warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, as if she had known him for lifetimes. How? He wondered. It defied logic. As dawn broke through the library windows, Lucas hadn't moved. It was as if Eleanor's spirit were lingering, as if she had left more messages he hadn't discovered yet. For the first time in years, he felt an irrational but undeniable urge to return to her hometown, to retrace Eleanor's steps and perhaps find a thread of understanding. By the following afternoon, Lucas received a call from Tom. "I think I found something," he said, his tone unusually cautious. "Sarah Blake's birth records are, let's say, unusual. She was adopted by the Blakes as a child. She's got a clear record, no signs of deception. But here's where it gets strange. Her adoption was registered in the same town Eleanor was from, and she would have been adopted not long after Eleanor's sister disappeared as a child." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Eleanor's sister? The sister had vanished when she was young, presumed lost or even dead, but Eleanor rarely spoke of it. The pain of it had been locked away with all her other private burdens. "Yes, Eleanor's sister," Tom confirmed, and the timeline matches up too closely to be mere coincidence. The ground felt like it was shifting beneath Lucas's feet. Could this woman be Eleanor's niece? And if so, how could she know such personal details about Eleanor's life? A chill crept up his spine at the possibilities. "All right, Tom," he finally managed, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Keep digging. And I need to see Sarah again. I need answers." As he hung up, Lucas felt a flood of conflicting emotions. Hope, confusion, and an uncanny sense that Eleanor's spirit was pulling him toward something. Something he couldn't yet see but could no longer ignore. 2 days later, Lucas sat in his office, his mind drifting between the present and the revelations about Sarah's past. He'd barely slept since Tom's discovery. The possibility that Sarah could be Eleanor's niece was astonishing. Yet, how could she know Eleanor's secrets? This was the question that haunted him the most. When his phone buzzed, he snapped back to reality. It was Tom. "Lucas, I've traced Sarah's adoption records a bit further. Her adoptive parents, the Blakes, were a quiet couple with no history of suspicious activity. They ran a small antique shop and raised Sarah in a modest neighborhood. Nothing about them stands out." Lucas listened, feeling a flicker of frustration. "So, there's no obvious connection to Eleanor's family beyond the fact that Sarah was adopted in the same town?" "Not directly, no," Tom admitted. "But here's where it gets interesting. I found that Eleanor's parents, the Fairchilds, quietly searched for their missing daughter for years. Some townspeople recall strange sightings around the old Fairchild estate during that time. Rumors that a girl who looked like Eleanor's sister was seen in the area now and then. It's a long shot, but Sarah might be linked to the family in ways we can't yet explain." Lucas sat back, absorbing this. It was one thing to consider Sarah as Eleanor's niece, but these mysterious sightings and strange stories about her connection to the Fairchild estate seemed to suggest something even more peculiar. "All right, Tom," he said slowly, "I need you to arrange a meeting with Sarah. I'll invite her to the estate and see if being here stirs anything in her memory. It's a risk, but maybe it will give us some clarity." 2 days later, Lucas was pacing in the entrance hall of his estate, waiting for Sarah's arrival. When the door finally opened and she stepped inside, her gaze traveled over the grand marble floors, the chandeliers, and the paintings that lined the walls. She looked both awestruck and strangely familiar with it all. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Kingsley," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "Please, call me Lucas," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual. His heart raced, knowing he was about to embark on a journey into memories he tried so hard to leave behind. "Shall we walk through the gardens?" It was Eleanor's favorite place. At the mention of Eleanor, Sarah's face softened, and a wistful look crossed her features. They strolled through the long hallways, passing family portraits and sculptures until they reached the glass doors leading out to the gardens. It was late afternoon, and the golden light made everything look ethereal, casting a warm glow over the sprawling green space and the delicate, carefully tended rose bushes. As they walked deeper into the garden, Lucas noticed Sarah's steps slow. Her gaze became fixed on a secluded spot in the far corner, where a small stone bench sat surrounded by wild roses. "This spot," she whispered, her voice trembling. I've dreamed about this place. It feels like I've been here before." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. This area was special. Eleanor had loved to sit here, often disappearing for hours with a book or simply lost in thought. He and Eleanor had rarely brought others here, making it even more puzzling that Sarah could recognize it. "You dreamed about this?" he asked cautiously, watching her face as she looked around with an almost trance-like expression. "Yes," she replied, kneeling beside the roses, her fingers grazing the petals as if she were reconnecting with a part of herself. "I used to have dreams of sitting here, feeling so peaceful. It's as if a part of me remembers this place." They sat together on the bench, and Lucas felt an inexplicable connection to this woman. A woman who seemed, impossibly, to carry Eleanor's spirit in small ways. She turned to him, her expression open and vulnerable. "Lucas," she said quietly, "I know this must be confusing for you, but it's confusing for me too. Ever since I was young, I've had these strange dreams. I'd see flashes of places I'd never visited and people I didn't know, yet they felt so real. The face I'd see the most was Eleanor's." Lucas swallowed hard. "You saw Eleanor? How?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'd see her in my dreams, sitting here or walking through these gardens, looking peaceful but lonely. I didn't even know her name back then, but when I saw photos of her after I learned about you, it was her." Lucas sat in silence, unable to find words. He was torn between suspicion and the intense, almost desperate urge to believe her. Finally, he spoke, his voice tinged with hesitation. "Sarah, there's a possibility you might be connected to Eleanor more directly than you realize," he said. "Her sister went missing when she was very young. It happened in the same town where you were adopted. We think you may be Eleanor's niece." Sarah's face went pale. "Her niece?" she murmured. "That would explain some of the feelings I have, like fragments of memories that aren't my own. But why would I remember things Eleanor experienced? It doesn't make sense." Lucas shook his head. "No, it doesn't. But there are things in this world we can't fully understand." They sat in silence for a while, the warm breeze rustling the rose bushes around them. Sarah seemed to gather her thoughts, then spoke hesitantly. "Lucas, I don't know what this connection means, but I feel compelled to tell you something." She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. "When I was young, my adoptive mother gave me a ring. She said it belonged to my birth family, and that one day I'd understand its significance. I think it might be Eleanor's." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "You have the ring with you?" Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out a small velvet pouch. She opened it to reveal an intricately designed ring, one that looked hauntingly familiar. Lucas's hand trembled as he reached for it, recognizing the delicate engraving he had commissioned. "Forever, Eleanor and Lucas." "Eleanor's ring," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I had this ring made for her. It was our secret symbol of love, something only the two of us shared." He looked at Sarah, his emotions conflicted. The sheer impossibility of the situation overwhelmed him, yet here she was, carrying an artifact that belonged to Eleanor. An artifact that seemed to bridge an invisible chasm between the past and present. "Lucas, I don't know how this ring came into my life or why I feel so connected to Eleanor," Sarah whispered. "But I'm willing to explore it, to understand what it means." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the ring. "Then we'll search for the truth together." As they sat on the bench, a silent understanding passed between them. Lucas felt a sense of hope he hadn't known in years, a hope that somehow, through Sarah, Eleanor was reaching out to him once more. The days that followed were a blur of questions, research, and fleeting moments of strange clarity. Lucas had thrown himself fully into uncovering Sarah's connection to Eleanor, and each day brought more evidence that Sarah might indeed be the missing niece. But the unanswered mystery of how she knew Eleanor's secrets haunted him even more. Late one evening, Lucas sat in his study, poring over old family records and Eleanor's letters when his phone buzzed. It was Tom. "I found someone who might help clarify things," Tom said, his voice cautious but hopeful. "Her name's Margaret Thorne, an old family friend of the Fairchilds." She was close to Eleanor's parents before they passed and might know more about the disappearance of Eleanor's sister. She lives nearby. I can bring her over tomorrow. The next day, Margaret arrived. A dignified woman with silver hair and a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through Lucas. She settled into an armchair, looking around the study with a hint of nostalgia. "I remember this house well," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "Eleanor was like a daughter to me." Lucas offered her tea, then took a seat across from her. "Thank you for coming, Margaret." I've recently met someone who claims to have a connection to Eleanor. A young woman named Sarah. She was adopted, but there's reason to believe she may be Eleanor's niece." Margaret's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "So the sister's child might still be alive," she murmured, more to herself than to Lucas. "That would explain so many things." "What do you mean?" Lucas pressed. She glanced around, as if searching for the right words. "Eleanor's sister, Grace, vanished when she was very young. The family was shattered by it, and for years, they believed she'd been taken or lost. But Eleanor had a different theory. She was convinced Grace was still alive. She told me that sometimes, in dreams, she would see her sister as a grown woman, laughing and happy. She felt her sister's presence, even in adulthood. She believed Grace's spirit was somehow connected to hers, even across time and distance." Lucas's pulse quickened. Eleanor had these visions? Dreams of her sister living on? "Yes," Margaret nodded, her expression grave. "At first, we thought it was her way of coping with the loss. But Eleanor always had a way of knowing things she couldn't possibly know. It was almost as if her spirit stretched beyond her body. I know it sounds strange, but Eleanor was certain." Lucas sat back, absorbing this. Eleanor's dreams, her feeling that her sister was still with her. It was hauntingly similar to the way Sarah claimed to feel Eleanor's presence. Was it possible Eleanor's connection to Grace had somehow transferred to Sarah? Margaret leaned forward, her gaze intense. "If Sarah truly is Grace's daughter, Lucas, she might carry not only her mother's blood but a piece of Eleanor's spirit too. Sometimes, bonds like those can transcend explanation. Family holds on to family. You must be prepared for the unexpected." Lucas nodded, though he still found it difficult to accept. "There's more, Margaret. Sarah has memories of Eleanor's life. Details, places, even the garden. Things she couldn't know unless—" He trailed off, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "Unless Eleanor's spirit is somehow reaching her." Margaret looked thoughtful. "Then perhaps Eleanor's love for you was so strong, it found a way to stay behind. Love has a way of finding loopholes, doesn't it?" Her words lingered in the air, the silence heavy with the mystery they were trying to solve. Margaret left shortly afterward, promising to help in any way she could, but Lucas's mind was too restless for sleep. He found himself pacing the library, replaying Margaret's words. He felt torn between logic and the growing conviction that something extraordinary was happening. That night, he was woken by a soft knock on his door. Groggy and disoriented, he opened it to find Sarah standing there, looking visibly upset. "Lucas, I had to come see you," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of confusion and fear. He gestured for her to enter, guiding her to sit down. "What's wrong, Sarah?" She hesitated, looking down as if struggling to articulate her thoughts. "I've been having dreams, strange, vivid dreams. Last night, I dreamed I was in this mansion, walking through the halls. But I was someone else. It felt like I was Eleanor." Lucas's heart pounded. "What did you see?" "In the dream, I walked through these rooms, searching for something, someone. There was this overwhelming sense of love and loss. I was trying to reach you, but every time I got close, something would pull me back. I would wake up with this deep ache in my chest, as if a piece of me was missing." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Lucas, I don't know what's happening to me. These memories, these feelings, they're not mine, yet they feel so real." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Sarah, there's a possibility that your connection to Eleanor goes beyond family ties. I spoke to an old friend of Eleanor's family, Margaret. She said Eleanor used to have dreams of her missing sister, just like you're having dreams of Eleanor. She believed Grace was still alive. It's possible that Eleanor's connection to her family has somehow been passed on to you. Sarah looked both relieved and overwhelmed. So, I'm not losing my mind? Lucas smiled softly, reaching out to touch her hand. No, you're not. In fact, I think you might be a bridge, a way for Eleanor's love and memories to live on. Somehow, through you, she's finding a way to reach me. A deep silence settled between them, but it was filled with an unspoken understanding. Lucas felt an indescribable warmth as he looked at Sarah. For the first time since Eleanor's passing, the crushing emptiness he carried felt lighter. They sat together, their hands intertwined, as Lucas allowed himself to believe the impossible. Eleanor's love had somehow transcended time and space, reaching him through the spirit of a young woman who had no explanation for her memories or feelings, but who was now an irreplaceable part of his life. In the following days, Sarah and Lucas spent more time together, exploring Eleanor's favorite spots around the mansion and piecing together memories that seemed to flow from both of them. As they walked through the house, Sarah shared vivid recollections of Eleanor's laughter, the sound of her favorite piano piece, even the faint fragrance she used to wear. Lucas was overwhelmed, feeling as though he was living with Eleanor's memory brought back to life. One afternoon, as they strolled through the garden, Sarah paused by an old oak tree and knelt down, brushing aside leaves to reveal something buried in the soil. It was a small, rusted tin box, one Lucas had never seen before. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity piqued. Sarah opened it, revealing a delicate locket inside. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I've seen this in my dreams. Eleanor would sit under this tree and hold it close. I think it belonged to her." Lucas took the locket in his hands, gently opening it to find a tiny, faded photograph of himself and Eleanor, smiling, their faces filled with joy. A tear slipped down his cheek as he closed the locket, feeling Eleanor's presence as vividly as if she were standing right there with them. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how this is possible, but I feel as if Eleanor's with us. Thank you for bringing her back to me, even if just in fragments." Sarah nodded, her own eyes brimming with tears. "Maybe that's why I'm here, Lucas. To help you remember her, to help her love reach you once more." As they sat under the oak tree, Lucas felt a strange but comforting sensation, a feeling that Eleanor's love was indeed eternal, woven through Sarah's presence, her memories, and now, in this undeniable connection they shared. It was a mystery he could neither explain nor deny, but one that had filled his life with purpose once more. Lucas felt a renewed energy he hadn't experienced in years. Spending time with Sarah had rekindled a deep, almost spiritual connection to Eleanor that he had thought lost forever. Each moment spent with Sarah seemed to bring new memories of Eleanor to life, and her presence filled the house with a warmth that had been missing since Eleanor's death. But alongside this comfort was an intensifying urgency. He needed answers to the mystery that bound Sarah to Eleanor. One morning, Lucas's phone rang. It was Tom, who sounded more serious than usual. "Lucas, I found something," he said. "It's about Sarah's birth family." Lucas's heart quickened. "What did you find?" Margaret was right. Sarah's mother was indeed Grace Fairchild, Eleanor's sister. And there's something else. Grace disappeared under strange circumstances, but I found records suggesting that her life was more complicated than anyone realized. "What do you mean?" Tom's voice lowered. Apparently, there were rumors in town that Grace had gotten involved with a man who came from a very powerful family, one that might have had a hand in her disappearance. The air around Lucas seemed to thicken. "Are you saying someone could have taken her away because of her connection to this family?" "Yes. And I believe Sarah was born shortly after Grace went missing. It's possible that the adoption wasn't exactly legal, more like an arrangement to keep her origins hidden. That's why her records are so vague and difficult to trace." Lucas sat back, his mind racing. The story was taking a darker turn than he'd expected. "Thank you, Tom. You've given me a lot to think about." After hanging up, Lucas felt the weight of his discovery settle heavily on his shoulders. He needed to tell Sarah, but how? The news was bound to unsettle her, perhaps even unravel her fragile sense of identity. That evening, he found Sarah in the library, gazing at one of Eleanor's favorite paintings. a delicate watercolor of a field of wild roses. She turned to him, her face illuminated softly by the firelight, her eyes reflecting the quiet sadness he now recognized as part of Eleanor's spirit. "Lucas," she began, "I keep having the same dream. I see a small house by the edge of a lake. I don't know why, but it feels important. I feel like it's a part of who I am." Lucas took a deep breath, preparing to tell her everything. "Sarah, there's something I need to share with you. It might answer some of your questions, but it could be difficult to hear." She nodded, her expression braced for the worst. "I've confirmed that your biological mother was Grace Fairchild, Eleanor's sister," he began, watching as her eyes widened in shock. "But there's more. Grace may have disappeared because she was involved with someone powerful. It's possible her life was controlled by people who wanted her to vanish, to protect their interests." Sarah's face went pale, her hands clasping each other tightly. "So, my mother was taken away from her family, and I was hidden to keep me away from whoever this family is?" Lucas reached out, covering her hands with his. "I don't know for sure, but it seems likely. Whoever they were, they didn't want you or Grace to be traced back to them." She looked away, her gaze lost in the flickering shadows cast by the fire. "So much of my life has felt empty, like something was missing. And now, to know that I was hidden away, that I had a family who never even knew about me." She trailed off, her voice shaking with a blend of sorrow and anger. Lucas felt a pang of guilt for the pain his revelations had caused. But he knew she deserved to know the truth, painful as it was. "There's more, Sarah," he said gently. "This lake house you keep seeing in your dreams, it sounds like Eleanor's family's old summer cottage. It was where she and Grace spent their happiest years together." Sarah's eyes lit up, her sadness momentarily replaced by something almost like hope. "Can we go there, Lucas? I need to see it. Maybe I'll find answers, or maybe just a piece of myself." He hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Yes, we'll go. Maybe it's time I revisited the place, too." The next morning, Lucas and Sarah set off for the old Fairchild summer cottage, nestled in the mountains by a pristine, secluded lake. The drive was quiet, each of them lost in thoughts and memories, until the dense forest opened up to reveal a small, weathered cabin perched near the water's edge. Sarah stepped out of the car, taking in the cabin with wide eyes. It was as though she had stepped into her own memories. She walked toward the lake, her footsteps slow and hesitant, as if she expected the dream to dissolve at any moment. "Sarah?" Lucas called, following her toward the water. She turned to him, her face pale, yet filled with determination. "I've seen this place so many times in flashes in dreams. I always thought it was just my imagination, but now it's like coming home." Lucas watched as she wandered through the clearing, her hands brushing over the wild roses that grew along the lake's edge. He felt the familiar ache of Eleanor's absence, yet there was an odd comfort in seeing Sarah connect to the same landscape that had once meant so much to her mother and her aunt. Sarah's gaze drifted to a small stone bench near the water, partially obscured by a tangle of vines and fallen branches. She walked over to it, running her hand over its smooth surface, and paused, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "I remember sitting here with a woman." She looked up at Lucas, her eyes filled with wonder. "I don't know how, but I remember feeling safe, as if she were my mother. I can almost see her face." Lucas felt a knot form in his throat. That woman, it was probably Eleanor. She would have come here often, searching for any trace of her sister. I think she would have felt the same sense of comfort here, too. As they stood by the lake, a thought struck him. "Sarah, let's check inside the cottage. There might be something there that Eleanor left behind." They walked together to the cottage door, which creaked open to reveal dust-covered furniture and a faded floral rug, untouched since Eleanor's last visit. Sarah drifted from room to room as if led by some invisible force, stopping in what must have been Grace and Eleanor's childhood bedroom. The room held a small, sturdy dresser and a bed covered in an old quilt. On the dresser sat a delicate porcelain box with tiny painted roses. Sarah reached for it, lifting the lid to reveal a worn, handwritten note inside. She unfolded it with shaking hands. The note read, "My dearest Grace, if you ever find this, Know that I love you more than life itself. I'll never stop searching for you. Eleanor, Sarah gasped, clutching the note to her chest, tears filling her eyes. Lucas reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. She never gave up on Grace. Even after so many years, she believed Grace was out there somewhere. Sarah nodded, her voice choked with emotion. I wish I could have met her. I wish I could have known the family that loved me. Lucas's heart ached for her. But in a way, you're still connecting with her. Eleanor's spirit lives on through you, Sarah. You're honoring her love and keeping her memory alive. Sarah wiped her tears, her expression softening into one of quiet strength. Maybe that's why I'm here. To carry on the love that was lost. To help you find peace and, in some way, to bring Eleanor and Grace back together. As they left the cottage, Lucas felt a new sense of purpose growing within him. The mysteries of the past were unfolding, layer by layer, and Sarah's presence had not only brought Eleanor's love back into his life, but had also uncovered long-buried secrets that bound their families together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Through Sarah, he had found a link to the love he had thought was lost forever. As they drove back from the cottage, Lucas and Sarah were both quiet, lost in thought. The handwritten note from Eleanor had struck a deep chord within them both, filling Lucas with bittersweet memories and Sarah with a profound sense of belonging she'd never felt before. But as they neared the estate, Lucas couldn't shake a lingering question. If Eleanor had left messages in her childhood home, had she left more hidden secrets behind, even in their own home? That evening, after a quiet dinner, Lucas led Sarah to a room that had remained untouched since Eleanor's passing, her private study. This was a room where Eleanor had spent countless hours writing, reading, and, Lucas had often suspected, holding onto fragments of the past that she'd never fully shared with him. As they stepped inside, Lucas felt a wave of nostalgia and a flicker of sorrow. Eleanor's favorite armchair sat beside the fireplace, with her well-worn notebooks still stacked neatly on the small desk nearby. Sarah walked slowly, her gaze taking in the details of the room with a reverence that made Lucas's heart ache. It feels like I can still feel her here, Sarah whispered, as if she's waiting to share something with us. Lucas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They began to search the study carefully, hoping to find more notes or hidden keepsakes that might shed light on Eleanor's connection to her sister. Hours passed with no discovery until Sarah opened a drawer in Eleanor's desk and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling as she held it out to him. He took it from her hands, his breath catching when he opened it. Inside was Eleanor's wedding ring, its gold band worn smooth with time, engraved with a message so intimate that it took him a moment to steady himself. Forever, in this life and the next. The engraving mirrored the message on the ring Sarah had carried since childhood, the one she believed had been passed down from her birth family. Seeing it here, its twin, filled Lucas with a mixture of wonder and confusion. How could there be two identical rings, each inscribed with a message known only to Eleanor and himself? He looked up at Sarah, and she was staring at the ring with a dazed expression. I have the same one," she whispered, pulling her ring from her pocket, holding it beside Eleanor's. They were identical in every detail. "But how?" Lucas murmured, struggling to understand. "I had only one ring made for Eleanor. There shouldn't be a second one." Sarah's hand trembled as she held both rings, an unreadable look in her eyes. Maybe she had another made, a replica she intended to pass down to Grace. It might explain why it was given to me after Grace's disappearance. Lucas nodded slowly. It made sense that Eleanor, bound by love to her sister and perhaps sensing Grace's fate, would want to create a symbol that connected their family across generations, even if the original had been intended only for their marriage. After a moment, Sarah placed the rings side by side on the desk, her gaze lingering on them. "Do you believe it's possible Eleanor wanted me to have this? That she somehow planned for me to find my way back to you?" Lucas felt a surge of emotion as he looked at her. "I think Eleanor's love transcended anything we could ever understand. These rings, they may be her way of reminding us that love doesn't vanish with death." They stayed like that for a moment, the silence filled with a strange peace. But as the night went on, Lucas began to feel the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. The following day, Tom arrived at the estate with a folder of research he'd compiled on Grace's life and disappearance. Lucas and Sarah met him in the library, eager to hear what he'd uncovered. "After you visited the cottage, I looked deeper into Grace's disappearance," Tom began, opening the folder. "I found records of a local man, someone Eleanor's parents disapproved of. His name was Albert Rivers. He was rumored to have been romantically involved with Grace, but the Fairchilds were against it, given his reputation." Lucas frowned. "And you think he had something to do with Grace vanishing?" Tom nodded, his expression grave. "It's possible. Albert's family was powerful in the area, but they had a dark history. When Grace disappeared, he left town soon after and never returned. Rumors swirled, but no one dared accuse him directly. He had the resources and influence to cover his tracks, but there are signs that someone tried to reach Grace's family afterward." Sarah looked at Tom, her face stricken. "If Albert was my father, then maybe he wanted to erase any trace of Grace and me." Tom nodded solemnly. "It's possible. I also found some letters Grace's friends had written after her disappearance. They mentioned a hidden love that had grown dangerous, and they feared for Grace's safety. If Albert's family disapproved, they may have forced him to hide his connection to Grace and to you." Lucas felt his heart grow heavy. Sarah had lived her entire life without knowing any of this, without any understanding of her past. And Eleanor, she had spent years grieving her lost sister without ever knowing what had happened. Later that night, Lucas and Sarah returned to Eleanor's study, where the two identical rings lay side by side on the desk. They sat in silence, contemplating the rings and the stories they held. "Lucas," Sarah finally said, her voice soft, "maybe these rings were meant to keep us connected, even when all else was lost. I feel like they're pieces of Eleanor and Grace's story, reminders that love can endure even the darkest circumstances." He reached out, placing a hand over both rings, feeling the weight of their shared history, their intertwined destinies. "I believe that too, Sarah. These rings are symbols of love that refuse to die, and through them, we can honor Eleanor and Grace's memory, the bond they shared." She looked up at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you for bringing me into this world, for helping me understand who I am." Lucas's throat tightened, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Thank you, Sarah, for bringing Eleanor back to me, in ways I never thought possible." They stayed that way, the rings gleaming softly in the dim light, binding them to a love that had crossed time, family, and even death itself. They both knew that, whatever had come before, they were now part of a legacy far greater than their own lives, one that honored the love and resilience of two remarkable sisters. And with that, Lucas felt a sense of closure, an unexpected peace knowing that, through Sarah, Eleanor's memory would live on, forever bound to the love that had transcended everything. As summer days lingered over the Kingsley estate, Sarah and Lucas grew closer, united by the revelations of the past. But with each answered question, new mysteries seemed to emerge, leading Lucas to wonder if there were other hidden messages Eleanor had left behind. He found himself drawn to the estate's gardens, where Eleanor had spent so many hours. The place had a calming effect, and Lucas believed it might offer some forgotten memories, ones that could bring even more clarity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow across the garden, Lucas invited Sarah to walk with him. The air was warm, filled with the scent of roses and lavender, and birds chirped softly in the background. They strolled in silence until they reached Eleanor's favorite spot, a secluded corner with a small stone bench framed by wild roses. "This was Eleanor's sanctuary," Lucas said quietly, running his hand over the stone bench. "She used to say it was where she felt closest to herself, to everything she loved and missed." Sarah took a deep breath, as though she were breathing in Eleanor's essence, and slowly sat down on the bench. "I feel like I belong here," she whispered. "It's as if I can feel her presence, her warmth." She looked up at Lucas, her eyes filled with something deeper than simple affection, a bond that went beyond words. "Sarah," Lucas began, his voice catching as he spoke, "meeting you has been like finding Eleanor again. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something between us that feels as if she's here, watching over us, guiding us. He hadn't meant to sound so vulnerable, but he couldn't deny the connection he felt to both Sarah and Eleanor through this garden. This shared space that held memories for each of them in different ways. Sarah reached out, taking his hand, her gaze steady and filled with understanding. I feel it too, Lucas. Eleanor's love, her presence, it's alive in everything here. And maybe that's why I found my way to you. Maybe she wanted me to help you heal, to give you the closure she never had. They sat together, a peaceful silence settling between them as if Eleanor herself were blessing their union. As the stars began to emerge, casting a gentle glow over the garden, Sarah seemed to grow pensive, her expression clouded with something unsaid. "There's something I haven't told you," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Ever since I came here, I've been having visions, memories that aren't mine. Sometimes I see her, Eleanor, sitting right here on this bench. She's holding a small wooden box in her hands, as though it holds a secret she's afraid to share. It's like she's waiting, hoping that someone will come to understand it." Lucas looked at her with growing interest. "A box? I never found anything like that. But maybe it's still here, buried or hidden somewhere in the garden." They both rose, and with a shared resolve, began to search the area around the bench, clearing away leaves and vines. After several minutes, Sarah let out a soft gasp as her fingers brushed against something hard, hidden under the foliage. She pulled it free, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden box, its surface worn and faded from years of exposure. Lucas felt a surge of emotion as he gently took the box from her hands. Eleanor must have hidden it here, knowing that one day someone might find it. "I can't believe this has been here all along." Together, they opened the box to find a delicate, handwritten note resting on a bundle of dried lavender. The note was addressed to Lucas, its familiar handwriting unmistakable. "My dearest Lucas, if you are reading this, then you have finally found your way back to the place that holds my heart. This garden, these roses, and this bench have seen the truest parts of my soul. Here, I have left my greatest secret, something I could not bear to tell you while I was alive." The letter continued, each line weaving a bittersweet tale of love and longing. "Grace was my other half, my mirror. Losing her left a hole in my heart that could never be filled. I tried to move on, to build a life with you, and to love you as deeply as I could. But there was always something pulling me back, something that never let me fully let go of Grace." Lucas's hand trembled as he read on, his heart aching for the depth of Eleanor's loss and the silent sorrow she had carried. "There were nights when I dream of Grace, of her laughter and her spirit, and as the years passed, I began to believe she was still out there, waiting for me to find her. I left this note here as a reminder to myself that love endures, that our hearts can reach those we cherish, even if we never see them again. I know that one day you will understand." A tear slipped down Lucas's cheek as he finished reading. He looked over at Sarah, who was also wiping away silent tears. "This was Eleanor's way of connecting us," she whispered. "It's as if she knew, somehow, that I would come, that I would bring her love back to you." Lucas nodded, struggling to speak. "I never knew how much pain she held inside. She was so full of life, so radiant. And yet, she carried this quiet burden all those years." Sarah reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "But she didn't carry it alone, Lucas. Through this garden, through me, her love has come full circle. Her spirit has found a way to reach you again." They sat together under the starlit sky, holding each other as the garden around them seemed to come alive with Eleanor's presence. Her love, her memory, and her wishes were woven into every petal, every leaf, whispering the secrets of the past and the hope of new beginnings. In the days that followed, Lucas and Sarah visited the garden often, reading and rereading Eleanor's letter, feeling closer to her with every word. And as they spent more time together, their connection deepened, a bond not only built on shared memories, but on the love that had brought them both to this moment. One afternoon, while walking together in the garden, Sarah noticed a small rose bush near the lake that had yet to bloom. Its buds were small, tightly furled, as if waiting for the right moment to blossom. "Lucas," she said, touching one of the buds gently, I think we should plant a new rose bush here, something that can bloom every year as a reminder of Eleanor and Grace, a symbol of their bond and the love they left behind. Lucas smiled, touched by the idea. That's a beautiful thought. I think Eleanor would have loved that. Together, they chose a spot close to the lake, digging into the soil and planting a young rose bush. As they finished, Lucas felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if the spirits of Eleanor and Grace were watching over them, content to see their love honored in this way. When they finished, Lucas looked at Sarah, his heart brimming with gratitude and affection. Sarah, thank you for coming into my life. You've helped me find peace with Eleanor's memory, something I never thought possible. And through you, I feel as though she's still here, guiding me. She smiled, her gaze warm and steady. Lucas, I feel like I found my home, my family. I've always felt a part of me was missing, but being here with you, it's as if I've finally found where I belong. In that moment, under the quiet, watchful presence of Eleanor's garden, Lucas realized he had been given a second chance, not only at love but at finding a family that transcended time, loss, and all the mysteries of the past. As summer turned to autumn, Lucas and Sarah fell into a comfortable rhythm at the Kingsley estate. They spent days poring over family letters and memories, unraveling Eleanor's secrets and understanding the tangled history that had brought them together. The young rose bush near the lake had taken root, growing stronger by the day, a small but enduring symbol of Eleanor and Grace's bond. Yet, even as they pieced together the past, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something left undiscovered, some final secret waiting to be revealed. One chilly morning, while going through Eleanor's belongings, Sarah came across a delicate, silver locket hidden in an old jewelry box. She opened it carefully, revealing a faded photograph of two young girls with identical grins, their arms wrapped around each other. It was Eleanor and Grace, captured in a moment of carefree joy. On the other side of the locket, a small note was engraved, "For Grace, wherever you may be." Sarah's fingers traced the engraving as she showed it to Lucas, her eyes filled with awe. "This was meant for Grace," she murmured, "but it never found its way to her." Lucas took the locket, his heart heavy with emotion. Eleanor must have kept this close to her all her life. It's like she was still holding onto the hope of reuniting with Grace, even after so many years. He fastened the locket around Sarah's neck, his hands lingering for a moment. "You should have it, Sarah. You're the closest thing Eleanor ever had to reuniting with her sister." Sarah touched the locket, her expression tender and solemn. "Thank you, Lucas. This means more to me than I can say." Wearing the locket seemed to awaken something in Sarah, a sense of connection, not only to Eleanor but to Grace, the woman she had never known yet whose memory lived within her. The more she wore it, the more she felt drawn to explore the estate's rooms and gardens, as though Grace's spirit were guiding her, leading her to something hidden. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Sarah told Lucas about a memory that had come to her in flashes, a faint recollection of a silver pendant her adoptive mother had given her, one she had never thought much of until now. "It was a pendant with a small, ornate charm," Sarah said thoughtfully. "I remember my mother telling me it was from my birth family, but I never connected it to Eleanor or Grace. Now I'm wondering if it was a part of them all along." Lucas's eyes lit up. "Do you still have it?" Sarah nodded, pulling a small box from her bag. She opened it to reveal a beautiful pendant, intricately designed with interwoven silver vines encircling a tiny, polished sapphire. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. It was an heirloom, passed down through generations of Fairchild women. Lucas examined it closely, his eyes widening. "This pendant, Eleanor told me about it once. It belonged to the Fairchild family for generations, meant to be passed down from mother to daughter as a symbol of strength and loyalty. Eleanor said it had been missing since Grace's disappearance." Sarah's breath caught. "Then it must have been Grace's, and somehow, it found its way to me." They looked at each other, the weight of this discovery settling heavily between them. This pendant was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a link to the past, a symbol of the legacy that Sarah had unknowingly carried her whole life. Lucas reached out, gently clasping the pendant in Sarah's hand. "You were meant to have this, Sarah." It's as if Grace and Eleanor's love and strength found their way to you, guiding you back to us." She smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. Maybe they did. Maybe all of this was meant to bring us together, to carry on their legacy and honor everything they couldn't finish in their lifetimes. They spent the rest of the evening lost in quiet reflection, holding the pendant and feeling the presence of the two sisters who had shaped their lives so profoundly. The next day, Lucas and Sarah returned to the garden to plant another rose bush beside the young one they had placed there months before. As they worked together, digging into the earth and setting the new bush in place, Lucas felt an unexpected sense of peace. He realized he had found closure, not only for himself but for Eleanor's memory, for Grace's lost legacy, and for the new life he was building with Sarah. As they finished planting, Sarah looked up, her face illuminated by the soft autumn sunlight. "Lucas," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I want you to know that you've given me a home, a family I never thought I'd have. I can't thank you enough for everything." Lucas reached out, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, you've brought Eleanor back to me in ways I never thought possible. I don't know how to explain it, but it's as if you were always meant to be here, part of this family. Thank you for helping me honor her memory, for being the light I didn't know I needed." They stood there, hand in hand, surrounded by the blooming roses and the lingering spirit of the past, knowing that they had finally found peace. They would carry on Eleanor and Grace's memory, not only in the symbols they wore and the roses they planted, but in the love they shared and the family they were building together. In the quiet of the garden, beneath the canopy of stars that began to the evening sky, Lucas felt a presence, a warm, gentle spirit that seemed to embrace them both, reassuring them that Eleanor and Grace's legacy would live on, forever intertwined with their own. And in that moment, he knew they had been given a second chance, not only at love but at finding a family that would endure through time, loss, and all the mysteries of the past. As autumn deepened and the first hints of winter crept into the air, Lucas and Sarah continued exploring the past, honoring Eleanor and Grace's memory by learning everything they could about the Fairchild family. Each discovery seemed to knit their lives closer together, weaving a legacy built on love, resilience, and reunion. Yet, even with all they'd uncovered, Lucas felt there was still something unfinished, a piece of the story left unspoken. He couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's spirit was leading them toward one last revelation. One crisp morning, while sorting through Eleanor's journals in the library, Sarah found an envelope wedged between two heavy books. The envelope was yellowed with age, its edges worn, and the name Lucas was written in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. "Lucas, look," Sarah said softly, handing him the envelope with reverence. Lucas took it, his fingers trembling as he carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, and as he read Eleanor's words, he felt a surge of emotion he hadn't anticipated. "My beloved Lucas, if you're reading this, I can only imagine the sorrow that must have led you to my journals. There is something I could never share with you in life, something that haunted me every day, though I hid it as best as I could. It is the story of Grace and the child she had before she vanished." Lucas's heart skipped a beat, and he glanced at Sarah, who was watching him with wide, questioning eyes. He continued reading aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace's disappearance was no accident, Lucas. She was taken. She had fallen in love with someone our family didn't approve of, someone whose powerful family would not accept her, and she was carrying his child. They threatened her, forced her to leave everything behind, including her child. But I always felt that, somehow, her spirit would find its way back to me." Lucas paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's. The room was filled with a charged silence as the weight of Eleanor's words settled around them. "Sarah, Eleanor knew. She knew about you. Maybe not in life, but in spirit. She knew that her sister's child would one day come back." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over as she processed the full truth of her connection to Eleanor and Grace. So, Eleanor always believed. She always thought Grace's child would find her way back? Lucas nodded, his own voice unsteady. "Yes, I think Eleanor believed that love would transcend everything. The years, the loss, even death itself. Somehow, she believed that you would find us." Sarah's eyes shone with the unspoken understanding that had been growing between them, the bond that seemed to have been woven long before she was even born. "But there's more," Lucas said, steadying himself as he continued reading the letter. "I kept something safe for Grace, a piece of our family that I hoped would one day reach her child if they ever came home. It's hidden in a place that was sacred to both of us, the garden. I hope that, wherever you are, you will feel her spirit there, just as I always have." Lucas's gaze shifted toward the window, where the garden lay beyond, now touched by frost but still vibrant with life. He felt a thrill of anticipation. Eleanor's last gift, a final message, perhaps something Grace had left behind, was waiting for them in the garden, a place that had held their memories all along. That evening, as twilight descended over the estate, Lucas and Sarah walked out to the garden, drawn by a shared sense of destiny. The air was cool, laced with the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the soft glow of the setting sun cast long shadows over the wild roses and the young bushes they'd planted together. They moved instinctively to Eleanor's favorite spot by the lake, where the stone bench sat waiting, surrounded by roses. "Eleanor left us something here," Lucas said, his voice a mixture of hope and awe. "We just need to find it." They knelt down beside the bench, clearing away leaves and vines, searching every inch of the ground for some hidden compartment or buried keepsake. After a few minutes, Sarah's fingers brushed against a small stone embedded in the soil. She pulled it loose, revealing a wooden box beneath. Her heart racing, Sarah carefully lifted the box and set it on the bench. Together, they opened it to find a delicate, intricately woven bracelet adorned with small charms, each inscribed with initials: E for Eleanor, G for Grace, and S for Sarah. Alongside it was another letter in Eleanor's handwriting, shorter this time but filled with the same tender warmth. "To my niece, Sarah, who has come home at last. This bracelet belonged to my mother, passed down to Grace and me, and now it belongs to you. Through this, you are forever bound to your family, a legacy of love that will never fade. Remember us, carry us with you, and know that you have brought peace to those who came before you. With all my love, Eleanor." Sarah held the bracelet in her hands, her tears falling freely as she read Eleanor's words. She had spent so much of her life searching for a sense of identity, a family she had never known. Now, standing in the garden with Lucas, she felt complete, embraced by the love of her mother, her aunt, and the generations of family who had come before. Lucas placed a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Sarah, you've done what Eleanor always dreamed of. You've brought our family back together. I can feel it. They're at peace now, knowing that love has carried on through you." They stood together in the garden, holding Eleanor's last gift, a symbol of the bond that had defied time and distance, uniting them in a way neither of them could have anticipated. In that moment, Lucas understood that, in finding Sarah, he had not only honored Eleanor's memory but had been given a second chance at the love and family he had lost. Over the weeks that followed, Lucas and Sarah wore Eleanor's bracelet and locket as reminders of the legacy they carried. The estate, once filled with the heavy silence of grief, now buzzed with renewed energy and warmth, as if Eleanor and Grace's spirits had breathed life back into every corner of the house. On a quiet winter morning, as snow dusted the garden with a glistening layer of white, Lucas proposed that they hold a small ceremony to honor Eleanor and Grace. Together, they planted a third rose bush beside the others, creating a small grove of roses by the lake. Lucas spoke a few words, his voice breaking as he thanked Eleanor and Grace for the gifts they had given, for guiding Sarah to him, and for the love that had endured despite all odds. Sarah placed the bracelet on the new rose bush, a symbolic gesture of offering the family heirloom back to the earth, letting it become part of the legacy they had built together. As she stood back, hand in hand with Lucas, she whispered a quiet promise to her mother and her aunt. "I will carry you with me always. I am home." The ceremony ended in a quiet, shared peace, with Lucas and Sarah feeling the comforting presence of Eleanor and Grace surrounding them. They had found closure, a sense of belonging, and a future that honored the love of those who had come before. That night, as they sat together by the fire, Lucas looked at Sarah, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude and hope. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me back to life. Eleanor's love brought you to me, and now I can finally say goodbye, knowing she's at peace." Sarah smiled, her gaze warm and steady. "Lucas, I think we were both meant to find each other. And now we can carry on, together, with Eleanor and Grace as part of us." As they sat in the soft glow of the fire, surrounded by the memories of their shared family, Lucas knew they had been given a gift far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Their love, forged in the memory of Eleanor and Grace, was a legacy that would live on, forever entwined with the past, present, and future of the Kingsley and Fairchild families. And in that unity, Lucas and Sarah found a peace that would carry them forward, bound by love that had defied even the bounds of time. Winter settled over the Kingsley estate, blanketing the gardens and the surrounding landscape in a peaceful silence. The small grove of roses by the lake lay dormant, their bare branches lightly dusted with snow, a promise of new life that would bloom with the coming spring. Inside the mansion, the warmth of the hearth brought a gentle glow to the rooms where Lucas and Sarah shared the newfound comfort of family and belonging. Since the ceremony to honor Eleanor and Grace, a quiet serenity had filled Lucas's heart. He often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought Sarah into his life. She was more than the niece of his beloved Eleanor. She was the family he hadn't realized he'd been searching for all along. One morning, as snow flurries drifted outside the window, Sarah joined Lucas at the breakfast table. She wore Eleanor's locket around her neck, her expression thoughtful as she sipped her coffee. "I've been thinking about something," she began, her gaze steady yet reflective. Lucas looked up, intrigued. "What's on your mind?" "After all we've discovered, I feel it's time for me to trace the rest of my roots. I want to understand more about Grace's life, who she was, who she loved, and the challenges she faced. I want to honor her story as Eleanor honored her memory." Lucas nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "I think that's a beautiful idea, Sarah. Discovering Grace's story will bring even more closure to Eleanor's memory and to the legacy you're carrying forward." They decided that after the holidays, they would visit the small town where Grace had lived before her disappearance. Together, they would piece together the fragments of her life, uncovering details that Eleanor hadn't known and that Sarah could now bring to light. A few weeks later, on a bright, chilly morning, Lucas and Sarah arrived in Grace's hometown. The town was quiet, its charm preserved in the historic buildings, quaint shops, and cobblestone streets. They began their journey at the town's archives, poring over records and newspaper articles from the years when Grace had lived there. One record in particular stood out, a handwritten account from a woman named Beatrice, a childhood friend of Grace's, who had kept a diary during those years. Lucas and Sarah were captivated as they read her words. Grace was as radiant as ever today, talking about her dreams of leaving town, of making a life of her own. She spoke of someone she loved but was afraid of losing. She said their love would be misunderstood, and yet she couldn't let him go. "I only hope she finds peace, wherever life takes her." The words were bittersweet, filled with the joy and heartbreak of a young woman who had carried a love that could not flourish under the constraints of family expectations and societal pressures. Sarah felt a pang of sadness, imagining Grace's struggle, her deep desire to follow her heart yet stay true to her family. Reading these accounts gave Sarah a sense of Grace's essence, the courage she had shown in defying expectations, her determination to hold on to love despite the obstacles. With each page, Sarah felt a renewed respect for her mother's spirit, a fierce loyalty that had endured even as Grace's life had taken her far from her family. On their last day in town, Sarah and Lucas visited the small cottage where Grace had lived before she vanished. The owner, an elderly man who had known the Fairchilds, kindly allowed them to walk the grounds. Snow covered the small garden, and Sarah could almost imagine her mother's presence there, tending to the flowers in spring, dreaming of a life she could call her own. As they stood outside the cottage, Sarah felt an unexpected surge of peace. Grace had been a part of this place, had lived and loved here, leaving behind memories that now felt real and tangible. Sarah understood that her mother's spirit, much like Eleanor's, had found a way to live on, through the love passed down from one generation to the next. Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's at peace now, Sarah, just like Eleanor." and now you're the one carrying their stories forward." She turned to him, a soft smile gracing her face. "I feel as if I've finally found them both, and in doing so, I've found myself. Thank you, Lucas. None of this would have been possible without you." Returning to the estate, Lucas and Sarah carried a quiet sense of closure, a feeling of unity that only deepened their bond. They began to plan for the future, deciding to turn part of the estate into a foundation in Eleanor and Grace's memory, a place to help others who, like Grace, had felt constrained by life's limitations, by society's expectations. It would be a legacy of hope, love, and resilience, a way to honor the Fairchild and Kingsley family histories. In the weeks that followed, the foundation began to take shape. The mansion's east wing was transformed into an office for the foundation's work, and Lucas and Sarah spent their days creating programs, connecting with charities, and organizing events to support their mission. Through this work, they felt closer to Eleanor and Grace than ever before, their legacy continuing to blossom through each act of kindness and compassion. One evening, as they were finishing up plans for the foundation's inaugural event, Lucas and Sarah found themselves in the garden, the night sky clear and filled with stars. The young rose bushes they had planted together stood resilient in the winter cold, their roots buried deep, waiting for spring to bring them back to life. Lucas reached out, taking Sarah's hand as they gazed at the rose bushes. "I believe Eleanor and Grace would be proud of everything we've done, of the love we're continuing to share in their honor." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I think they would be, and I believe they're still with us, watching over us, guiding us." They stood in silence, each lost in their thoughts, feeling the presence of Eleanor and Grace in the quiet beauty of the garden. They were more than just memories now. They were part of a legacy that Lucas and Sarah were determined to uphold. As they turned to head back inside, a soft breeze rustled through the garden, carrying with it the faint scent of roses, even in the heart of winter. It was as though Eleanor herself were there, blessing them with her love, a gentle reminder that she and Grace would always be part of their lives. Hand in hand, Lucas and Sarah walked back into the warmth of the mansion, their hearts full of peace and purpose. They had uncovered the mysteries of the past, reunited the spirits of Eleanor and Grace, and forged a bond that would carry them into a future built on love, resilience, and the strength of family. Through the foundation, the memory of Eleanor and Grace would live on, a testament to the unbreakable ties of family and the enduring power of love that had transcended life and death. And as Lucas and Sarah stood on the threshold of this new chapter, they knew they would carry the stories, the memories, and the love of Eleanor and Grace forever, weaving them into the fabric of their own lives, their own legacy.